Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I am your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and the Salesology Prospecting Method. And I am known as the queen of cold calling. Today, we have a very special guest. We have Andy Paul. And I've known Andy for many years. It's great to have him here. He is the founder of Zero Time Selling. And he is also the host of the top-rated sales podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul. And I was lucky enough to be invited to be interviewed on his podcast. And he's got more than 1,100 episodes to date and millions of downloads. And it's really a go-to resource for sales leaders and top sales producers. Andy's also the author of the Amazon best-selling book, Sell Without Selling Out, a guide to success on your own terms. And he's also, just incidentally, the author of 2 other Amazon best-selling books, Amp Up Your Sales, Powerful Strategies that Move Customers to Make Fast, Favorable Decisions, and Zero Time Selling, 10 Essential Steps to Accelerate Every Company's Sales. Andy is the founder of Zero Time Selling, which is a sales advisory firm. And before he started his own company in 2000, Andy had a successful sales career in tech startups, during which he sold over $600 million of complex systems and services to some of the world's largest enterprises. So welcome, Andy.
Wendy, thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So let's begin at the beginning. What is the Andy Paul story?
The accidental salesperson. Like many people, right?
Like many people.
Like many people. Just graduated college, had no idea what I wanted to do, and sort of when the money started running out, I had to get serious about looking for work. And as a liberal arts major, I was untrained for anything, basically. So I went to the Career Placement Center on campus, and they were just, at the time, all the big tech companies of the day, IBM, Burroughs, Xerox, so on, were recruiting salespeople, though they very carefully did not call them sales positions. They called them marketing management training system programs. But yeah, I just sort of fell into it because I needed work, and that's who was hiring.
Well, it's interesting to me because I have your most recent book here, Sell Without Selling Out. Mm-hmm. And in the book, you talk quite a bit about your difficulty in the beginning years with the way they went about training you in sales. And, you know, what's super interesting to me, I interviewed Mark Hunter recently, who was fired from his first 2 sales jobs. I didn't know that, but
we've all been fired at one point or another. Yes.
And I interviewed Kendra Lee from KLA Associates a while ago, and Kendra apparently went through the IBM sales training, and they told her she'd never succeed as a salesperson, and then she went on to be one of their top performing reps.
I have the same experience, yes.
So share that experience with us, if you would.
Well, yeah. Well, so I went to work out of college for a company called Burroughs, at the time the second largest computer company in the world. They've since morphed into Unisys and other companies. But yeah, they scooped up hundreds, if not thousands, of college new grads every year and ran them through their training program, and which involved about 10 weeks of offsite training per year in the first year, excuse me. And so, yeah, I get to the first sales training class after I've been on the job about 2 weeks. We get sent away to our regional training center in Pasadena, California. And when you come back from those classes, you carry an envelope with the instructor's, review of your performance that you have to hand to your manager. And yeah, I handed mine to my manager, and it basically said, yeah, Andy's never going to make it in sales. He's just too analytical. And and fortunately, my manager at the time didn't pay attention to that at all. He told me he goes out and sells something. But it was this idea that at that time, the vision of this ideal salesperson was the extreme extrovert, the glad hand, the just follow the script and role plays. They always hated it when I'd interrupt role plays because I kept asking questions of the person I was role playing as opposed to pitching them. And that was, just this idea that if you're curious, a little more introverted, a little more analytical person, that they didn't have room for you, because how could you possibly succeed? And so a combination of that, and in fact, I'm not, I tend to be an independent thinker. Did not align with their vision of what a successful salesperson was.
That's surprising and yet not surprising.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a question for you about your book.
Sure.
Sell without selling out.
Yes.
What is your definition of selling out?
It's when a salesperson puts their interest above those of the buyer. And, that gets exhibited in several ways. That gets exhibited in, when you're pitching before you make an effort to understand the buyer, when it's all about you and the things you need and your process, and not really making an effort to truly understand the things that are most important to the buyer. And really coming at sales from I draw a distinction in the book between persuasion and influence, from a real persuasion-driven point of view, which leads you to these behaviors that buyers experience being very salesy. Because if you think your job as a seller is just to persuade the buyer to buy your product, well, then you don't really feel like you have a need to really understand what's important to the buyer, because it doesn't really matter. Your job is to persuade them to buy your product, whether you understand them or not.
So where do you think that comes from?
Oh, it comes from lots of things. I think that it in part, it comes from the top and the bottom, let's say. Bottoms up and tops down. So certainly it's the way people are basically trained and socialized in sales to a large extent. And I think that's still the case today, right? Is when you see this over-reliance, even in, some of our leading industries like software, is, just follow the process. Just follow the process. If you follow the process, it's going to work. As if it's the process that's selling the product, as opposed to, two humans that are interacting, a buyer and a seller. So it comes from the top, and it comes from the bottom, in the sense that people are somewhat socialized to think that salespeople act in a certain way and behave in a certain way. And it's just out there in popular culture, books, TV shows, movies, and so on. And perfect example of this, I was interviewing a woman on my show. Her name is Dawn Dieter Schmeltz. This is on my podcast, and she's the dean or head of the undergraduate sales program at Kansas State University, which is one of the premier undergraduate sales programs in the United States. And she says that when she teaches her entry-level sales course, so Introduction to Professional Selling, teaching 18, 19-year-olds with no experience or no exposure to sales, and when she does role plays, she said, it's funny, they all act super salesy, as if they think that's the way salespeople are supposed to behave. And so it's out there, right? It's just, people think that's an act you put on, and we don't do enough as sales trainers or sales leaders within companies to say, well, yeah, that's not what the buyer wants, right? This may be how we think we need to get the job done, but that's not what buyers want.
So I'm curious, you mentioned process, and that some companies or maybe some trainers say just follow the process, but what is the role of process then?
Well, I think there's process and then there's process, right? So a lot of process these days is sort of enforced through a certain level of, activity metrics that sellers have to hit. And it's, while sales is at heart always a numbers game, it's become more so to an extreme extent, I think, where you look in, that's that again, take software as an example in the SaaS world is companies are perfectly content sort of motoring along at a 20% win rate, meaning, hey, we're going to win just one of every 5 of our qualified opportunities. But that's okay, because we've got this process that includes what we're doing at the top of funnel to generate, leads flowing through, that if we're just okay at selling, we can close a certain percentage. And this has become sort of institutionalized, and it's sort of shocking when you talk to sales leaders. It's just how little focus there actually is on how do we win a higher fraction of our opportunities, right? How do we get better at executing how we sell in order to help our buyers make decisions to do business with us? And instead, it's just sort of sort of superficial in many respects. And it's really focused on the sellers, not on the buyer. And so there's been working with a company out of Australia that has done literally thousands of win-loss analysis interviews with enterprise buyers over the past 12, 13 years. And they sort of summarize their findings of the primary reasons why you win big deals and the primary reason why you lose big deals. Not one of the reasons why you win or lose had to do, and this is based on customer data, had to do with the product or the price or the functionality, had to do with these human elements of selling that I talk about in the book. Are we able to connect with the buyers? Are we able to build the relationships we need? Are we able to build the trust and credibility we need? Are we able to create a vision of what success will look like? These things that are just sort of more innately human skills, as opposed to, hey, let's just play the numbers. And if we have enough conversations, no matter how crappy they are, we'll win enough deals.
Well, it sounds to me like you're also saying sometimes you need to tweak the process.
Yeah, well, I think from a process standpoint, I think I had more in the draft of the book that we sort of edited out, maybe save for a future book about this. But the buyer doesn't identify with the sales process, right? When you think, okay, we've got, sort of map out, if you Google, B2B selling process, is you see these, linear stage-based sequences, first call, initial discovery, demo, in-depth discovery, or, whatever, qualification, blah, blah, blah. And they're basically all the same, and they've been the same for decades. I mean, they're the same ones that I learned on ages ago. But that's not the way the buyer looks at how they're going through this process. And so I think that one of the disconnects that still exists in sales that needs to be changed is that the buyer and the sellers have to work off the same process, right? As a buyer, yes. What am I doing? What am I going through as a buyer? A question I ask sales leaders all the time when they're looking at hiring people or even coming up with a strategy. It's like, okay, so what does the buyer need your salespeople to do and to be in order to help them get their job, which is to quickly gather and make sense of information to make an informed decision, right? What do they need your sellers to be? And almost no one asks their buyers, well, what attributes do we need in our salespeople, or what qualities or what experiences do we need in order to be able to help you get your job done?
Well, ultimately, isn't that what salespeople are trying to do, is help their clients get their jobs done?
Well, you'd think, right? But most salespeople, you ask them, they think their job is to go get an order, as opposed to my job is to help you make a decision. And those are two very different perspectives. And so, someone's asked me about this last week. About sales training. I said, well, I think salespeople have enough training by and large. I think what they don't have is the right perspective about what they're supposed to be doing. And as long as it still continues to be focused on what we as sellers need, as opposed to what the buyer needs from us, the sellers, then we're always going to have this performance issue. And we see the data, the external data that's talking about, quota attainment in B2B sales and win rates in B2B sales. And they're all last 10, 15 years have been on a downward trend. And it's like, well, that's crazy. We've got all this great technology that's come into sales and marketing that should be able to enable us to help our buyers do the thing they want to do, quickly gather and make sense of information they need to make an informed decision with the least possible investment of their time, resources, and attention. But it seems to be going the other way. So why is that? And I think that's because we've just gotten on this mode about it's all about us as sellers, as opposed to how do we really help the buyer get their job done? And if we do that, we'll be rewarded with the order.
And a lot of it also seems to be about taking the human beings out of the equation altogether, and which always puzzled me. But
well, it's the dream of many sales leaders, right? Is how can we take sellers out of the equation?
Automate everything.
Automate everything. And you can sort of see a little bit of the trend though, right? It's because think about it, and I write about this in the book, is that if you have what I consider low win rates, right? If your win rate on a consistent basis is less than 50%, then the buyer is making the decision to buy from you in spite of you, not because of you. Right? Think about that. I mean, there was a study that was published in a book earlier this year called, oh gosh, I forget the name, but written by a woman named Jennifer Colosimo and a couple of co-authors, and she was on my show. And they had commissioned outside research agency to do surveys of companies. I think they surveyed 14,000 companies, enterprises. And what they found was that the win rate globally in B2B on deals of 100K and higher was at 17%.
Wow.
Yeah, think about that, right? So if you're looking at it from the buyer's perspective, and especially this is true in the tech world, is the products, there's so many competitors in every segment. The products basically are indistinguishable from each other from a price or a feature standpoint. How are they making their decision? Well, that's what I'm saying, is when you have low win rates like that, they're sort of closing their eyes and putting a pin in one because it almost doesn't matter to them at that point. And so wouldn't you rather be in a position where your buyer's making an affirmative decision to buy from you? And if you can get into that position, then you're going to win a much higher fraction of your deals. If you're the reason why they want to make that decision. And we know from research from Gartner's, CEB, the Challenger books, as well as Forrester's done some work on this, that the number one influence on a buyer's decision, in fact, I think in Challenger they said it was 53% of the buyer's decision, is based on their experience with the individual seller, their buying experience. That's the most decisive, influential factor on the buyer's decision. And that was substantiated by this research done, I mentioned before, on all these win-loss analyses, is that that's not about at the end of the day, sure, product factors into it, functionality, pricing factors into it, but the tiebreaker is the experience with the individual seller.
So could you talk a little bit about pitch versus trust? You had a very interesting post on LinkedIn fairly recently about essentially how you can't build, if you are pitching, it's really hard to build trust.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think trust is, again, one of these words that you think, gosh, everybody should know what it is or the importance of it, but it sort of gets used so in such a cliche fashion that I think people sort of lose sight of the value of it. And as I write about in my book is you need to have trust, but where's the trust really important? I mean, at the end of the day, there has to be a level of trust for customers to buy from you. But it's actually important much earlier in the process, is that you need to build some level of trust with the buyers in order for them to provide the answers to the questions that you want to ask. The in-depth questions that are perhaps a little more penetrating, that they just don't give out the answers to everybody. I mean, you'd mentioned you'd spoken to Mark Hunter recently on your show, and he has a great line about this. He says, you've built trust with a buyer when they share something of a proprietary nature with you. And he didn't mean confidential, NDA type thing where they're giving away proprietary, but he meant, something they just don't normally share with outsiders. Right. And if you're a salesperson, you get in that position where people you're dealing with on the buyer side are willing to share that type of information with you, then you've built that level of trust. You're on a different path than other sellers that don't have that. Yeah. And that gives you this ability, as I write about in the book, is to say, I can now have a much better opportunity to truly understand things that are most important to the buyer. And I stress that because, not getting digressing too much, but look at the way discovery is handled these days with most sellers. It's like a little checklist and a survey, right? I'm going to ask these questions. They're the ones I normally ask, and I'm going to check boxes so we got the answer. But it doesn't really reveal to you what's really driving the buyer's decision. Now, I don't know about you, but I mean, in my career, especially when I was selling the 7, 8, and 9-figure type deals, is there was always one thing that was more important than everything else to the buyer. We could be getting these hugely competitive deals. There'd be 10 vendors. They'd get down selected to 3. Then the buyer would put out a final sort of quote unquote RFP to the final 3 vendors. They'd have these huge compliance matrices that ran hundreds of items, everyone seemingly important. But the fact is they weren't all important. And job as a seller is to find out which one really is driving the decision. And you're not going to get there if you don't build that level of trust with the buyer.
Yeah. I think everyone is taught to say, how will you make this decision? Or however, I had a conversation a while ago with a client who said to me, all buyers are liars. And I said to her, well, I don't actually think that's true. I just think that they don't always tell you the whole story.
Exactly.
Unless you've developed enough of a relationship with them that they do tell you the whole story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's interesting to bring that up, because I agree that you really, as your job as a salesperson, is not to take anything the buyer says at face value. Right? It's, you always want to have a little skepticism about it, because people have motivations for why. I mean, they're humans. We're dealing with humans. This is what makes it so fun and so complex at the same time. Is you don't understand where everybody's coming from. You as well as you maybe get to know some of your buyers, is, again, you're not lifelong friends. There's things you're not going to know. Is you need to apply some rigor to the information you're receiving, and think about it, and think about the context, that the various contexts that the buyer might be saying things in. And it's not, I agree with you. They're not like they're liars. It's just they're humans. They've got motivations for why they say things the way they say things. And it's your job to get better at trying to understand and asking questions, help you better understand what the real intent is.
And do you really understand what they are telling you, or are you interpreting it based on your own stuff?
Oh, absolutely. Right. I mean, yes, we absolutely carry our own biases into every interaction. And that's part of our challenge. Is, again, I think it's part of what makes the job fun. But the fun gets robbed when people try to become too reliant on a really rigid processes. You can claim that, hey, if you go ask Wendy certain questions, she's got this persona, she's always going to answer this way, and these are the things that are important to her. And sellers take these playbooks into action and sort of think of them as an immutable recipe. And it's just not the case, right? This is where we do a disservice to sellers, not training them to be more on the human side as opposed to sales side, because you're dealing with humans that are complex individuals. Every sales situation has a certain level of unexpected things that happen. What do you do when the unexpected happens, right? I mean, do you make an opportunity of it, make hay of it, or you just sort of let it pass by because you're so intent on following the steps that have been laid out for you? And I think it's, unfortunately, more and more sellers are trained in the latter. Just follow the steps.
Selling does require a certain level of creative thinking that I think is not always acknowledged or appreciated.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think, but that's also part of what makes it fun. Right? Yes. I was just writing something this morning about this. Is that, I don't know, somebody was writing last week on LinkedIn about sort of the perfect discovery call, and I was thinking, this idea that there's perfection in anything in selling or buying is just an illusion, and not a very useful illusion. The fact is that we're humans dealing with humans, and it's going to be complicated. It's going to be messy. It's going to be chaotic. There's going to be things that are done that are irrational, illogical. Hey, yes, that's just humans dealing with humans being humans. And how do we react in those situations? That is ultimately, I think, the measure of somebody who is consistently successful over a long career in sales, is this ability to adapt in the moment.
Yes. I want to ask you about embracing selling behaviors that align with your values and how you determine what those values are in the first place.
Right.
Before we do that, however, we're going to pause for a word from our sponsor. And our sponsor today is Salesology 3X Appointments. You know how frustrating and stressful it is when you leave every sales meeting wondering if your sales team knows how to sell because they're not selling, and all you ever hear from them are excuses. They blame your marketing. They say you need to do more social media, and they say you need a new website. You know something's wrong, but you don't quite know what it is, and you're even starting to wonder if it's you. You don't have a lot of options. You could fire them all and start from scratch, and that would be really expensive. And you're just sick of waking up in the middle of the night wondering how to fix this. Well, imagine instead that you have an easy-to-use, replicable system that ensures your team can easily schedule qualified appointments. And imagine that your team is excited and motivated. No more excuses. And you feel good. Salesology 3X Appointments can make that happen. If you're a business owner or a sales manager with an underperforming sales team, let's talk. Click on the link to my calendar in the show notes, schedule a time, and I look forward to meeting you. And we are back with Andy Paul, who is the founder of Zero Time Selling and the author of Sell Without Selling Out.
Hey, and we're back.
We are back. And so now let's talk values.
Sure.
How do you determine your values, and how do you, I know you've written about embracing selling behaviors that align with your values, but how do you pick your values in the first place?
Well, I don't know if you pick them in the first place. I think they get, inculcated in you through, so I say this only somewhat facetiously. Someone said, what's the cause of bad selling? And I oftentimes say bad parenting. Because, we're raised with a certain set of values, and, yes, you can adopt new values, you can modify your behaviors, but I think at the heart is, you have to do a little examination. But I think when you get yourself out there and you start selling, you start seeing the results of your interactions with people, because they're all brand new at some point or another, you really have to take a hard look at yourself and say, how am I being received? How am I being perceived by the people I'm interacting with? And, it's something you have to constantly look at. I don't think it's something that you do as, sort of one time early in your career. There was this great quote I saw. Have you ever read David Epstein's book, Range?
No.
So it's a really excellent book. Came out a few years ago. It's called Range: Why a Generalist Triumph in a Specialized World. And it's a great book about how people learn and adopt new behaviors, how they choose what they want to do in life, and so on. But he was a section of the book writing about this woman who's professor at the London Business School, Herminia Ibarra. And she had this great quote that says, "I know who I am when I see what I do." And I think that's a challenge, really, is the challenge to examine who we are as humans and as human salespeople, and examine how we're being perceived and received by the people we interact with, primarily our buyers. And I think the challenge that she put forth is, are we examining ourselves, right? Are we looking? Or are we just sort of blindly heading down this path that we've always done before? And we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, is a missing part in sales is just not enough time is spent asking our buyers, people we deal with on a daily basis, how we are doing, right? And not just measuring on the orders, but how are we doing? How is this call? Did this call meet the expectations you had for it? Is there something that we should have done that we didn't do? Do win-loss analyses, do buyer sentiment analyses in terms of sentiment about their experience with your salespeople. If you're a sales leader, it's just get this information. How are you being received by the buyers? And we just think that hey, we're blindly going to train up our salespeople and send them out in the world. And it's like, well, I asked the same question of people that are investing in sales training. It's like, okay, but have you asked your buyers what they need from your sellers in order to help them get their job done? Shouldn't you train to that as what you think in isolation they should be trained on?
So I'm curious about how you made a transition, because we're talking here a little bit about values. And, just about every company has like a page on their website. It says, here are our values. And then there's like this list. And maybe they live up to them, maybe they don't. So as a seller, someone that, let's say that you're a new salesperson, you're being trained to do certain things, follow a certain process, behave in a certain way. You were able to make a transition. Even your evaluation was bad. He'll never make it in sales. Your manager ignored it. And you were able to somehow flip a switch in your head and go, okay, even though I'm being told these things, I don't think that's right. I'm going to proceed in this other way. And I'm sure there were a lot of stops and starts along the path until you figured it out. But how did you flip that switch?
Well, there's a couple things at play. One is I knew that I was going to have the world's shortest career in sales if I didn't find a different way to do it. Because I'd go out on calls with senior sales reps and people have been around, and I'd had the training. And it was just like, this just isn't me. Right. And so, yes, sales is not for everybody. But I didn't feel that was really the case. I just felt like there had to be a different way, right? There just couldn't be one way to do this job. And so I sort of combined that with just being called an independent thinker, but being stubborn and a little bit of a skeptic and always questioning and willing to try new things. Experiment that, I started experiencing success. And once I started experiencing success, I made president of the club my first year, and again the second year, and first year as a sales manager when I was leading team. It's like, okay, so maybe there is something to this, right? But it could be a little scary, but you look at the choices and you sort of framed it as, you can sort of go along with the flow. You're just not going to last very long in the profession. You're not going to be happy. You'll burn out. You may have some success, but it's going to be hard to be consistently successful if you're not really enjoying what you're doing, if you don't find the fulfillment in it, if you don't find the creativity and the chaos, stimulating and motivating, if you're not a real problem solver at heart, if you don't really feel like you're there to serve the buyers, but you're just there to serve yourself, it's just not going to be a long career for you. And, unfortunately for most people who get into it, it's not.
And it can be a very unhappy career.
Oh, well, I think we see that, right? I mean, the data that came out from Uncrushed that did a big survey, I think 2021, of B2B sellers. Yeah, I mean, 2/3 of them virtually were saying, yeah, I'm depressed.
Yeah.
Right. And that's sure, we factor in a little bit of the pandemic there and the isolation and so on. But at heart, I think that is the lot of so many people in sales, is just not happy. And, the best feedback I ever received so far on my book was a gentleman who said, this has made me love selling again. Showed me that I can do it my way and succeed at it. And that was really one of the major motivations writing the book, is that there's not just one recipe or one way to succeed in sales. If there's 5 million people, and let's say theoretically in sales, there's 5 million unique ways to sell. And to increase your odds for success, it's finding a way to become the best version of you. Right? Not the best version of somebody else, the best version of you. And unfortunately, as we talked about before, early on, as so many people come into sales thinking that it's an act, like a character that a stage actor plays. And it's not that at all. It's about being you. And to the extent you can bring you to the front and your values, your character, things, your identity, I have to say that, as sellers, we have an identity, right? If you were to ask your buyers, hey, what's Wendy's identity as a salesperson? They could tell you because they've experienced it. Yeah. And so we're putting out this identity, whether we're thinking about it or not. Well, I think if you're conscientious about cultivating what that identity should be, right? Taking feedback from buyers and changing what you need to change, then you're putting yourself in a position to have a much more rewarding and fulfilling career.
So I love this, Andy. So I know you have a gift for our listeners, and also where can people find you? So tell us about your gift.
Yeah, we'll put in the show notes. You can download a free chapter of my book, From Sell Without Selling Out. And encourage people to click on that. You also have the website. You can take a little assessment about, in the book I describe, if you're not selling out, you're selling in, and which is the desired state. And so it's a little assessment sort of help you figure out where on the spectrum between selling out and selling in you currently sit. So you can take that on our website as well. And then, if people want to connect with me, the best way really is LinkedIn. After the usual preamble, mine is Real Andy Paul. And I'm pretty active there. And I'd love to have you engage with me there and connect with me.
And wonderful. So we are going to post the link to the free chapter of Andy's book, Sell Without Selling Out. We're going to post the link to the assessment, and we're going to post Andy's LinkedIn profile. So you just, after you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on the links. And so Andy, before we finish up, will you put your hand over your heart and promise me that you will come back? This has been a great conversation.
I definitely will. Maybe we could even do it in person. Do you do that?
Well, I have not, but there's no reason we couldn't try it.
Since we're both on occasional, you're there all the time in New York.
I'm in New York all the time, yes.
I'm there about a third of the time. But we should definitely rendezvous, see if we could do that.
Well, we will work it out.
All right.
Okay. And so you have been listening to Salesology Conversations with Sales Leaders, and our special guest is Andy Paul, who is the founder of Zero Time Selling and the author of Sell Without Selling Out. And if you found value in today's podcast, then think of one person that you know, a business owner or a sales professional, somebody that you think would also find value in this podcast, and share the link with them. And until we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.